You are not standing on a battlefield. You are standing in a stone courtyard, just after dawn. The air is cool and smells faintly of damp straw smoke, and yesterday bread. Somewhere behind you a bell has already rung once, and will ring again. This is not the sound of alarm or glory. It is the sound that tells a community of men that it is time to eat. To feed a Templar knight was not simply to place food on a table. It was an act governed by rule, habit, supply chains, and belief. The Knights Templar were a military religious order, founded in the early 12th century. They were sworn to poverty, chastity, and obedience. They were also professional warriors, who required strength, endurance, and consistency. Feeding them meant balancing ideals with calories and prayer with grain. You might expect a knight to eat like a lord. In reality, a Templar knight ate like a regulated worker. The rule of the Templars, written and revised across decades, specified not only when food was eaten, but how it was served, who received which portions, and what was forbidden. Meals were communal, quiet, and supervised. The food itself was intentionally plain. This was not because the order could not afford more, it was because restraint was part of discipline. Bread was the foundation. Almost every meal began with bread, and ended with bread. It was usually made from wheat when possible, but often mixed with barley or rye depending on region and harvest. Bread was baked in large communal ovens and stored carefully, because stale bread could still be eaten, but mold meant waste, and waste was a moral failure. You can imagine brothers breaking loaves, slowly listening to the scrape of crust against knife, while a reader recited scripture. Alongside bread there was pottage. This was a thick stew made from whatever vegetables were available. Onions, leeks, beans, peas, and cabbage were common. The pot simmered for hours, sometimes all day. Meat was limited. The rule allowed meat only on certain days, and even then not to everyone. Knights could eat meat 3 times a week, but other members such as sergeants and servants often received less. On fast days meat was replaced with fish, or more pottage. Silence during meals was enforced. You would hear chewing, swallowing, the soft clink of wooden bowls. Conversation was replaced by listening. One brother read aloud from scripture, or the lives of saints. This turned eating into instruction. It also prevented distraction. Eating was fuel, not pleasure. Wine was present but measured. Usually it was watered down. Excess drinking was punished not because wine was sinful, but because lack of control threatened order. Water was not always safe, so wine diluted with water was practical. Beer was also common in some regions. The amount was regulated and recorded. Behind this calm routine was a complex system of labor. Templar houses owned land across Europe and the eastern Mediterranean. Farms, vineyards, mills, and fisheries supplied food. Lay workers, tenant farmers, and hired laborers did much of the work. A knight eating a bowl of beans in a fortress in the Levant depended on planting decisions made months earlier in France or Spain. Food had to travel. Grain was milled, bagged, and moved by cart or ship. Salt was required to preserve meat and fish. Salt itself came from specific regions and was expensive. The order maintained storehouses and inventories. Loss to spoilage, theft, or delay could weaken an entire house. Feeding knights was logistics. In the eastern Mediterranean, the challenges were different. Climate, soil, and warfare affected supply. Fresh food was harder to secure during campaigns. Dried legumes, hard bread, and salted meat became essential. Knights carried food with them, but also relied on local purchases or requisition. This brought them into contact with local populations. Food became a point of tension and negotiation. There were also rules about who ate together. Knights ate separately from servants, and sometimes from sergeants. This was not luxury but hierarchy. Portions were equal among knights. Favoritism was forbidden. If a knight was sick, he could eat meat more often, but this had to be approved. The concern was not comfort but recovery and fairness. You might think boredom would set in. The same meals repeated week after week, year after year. In a sense that was the point. Predictability reduced desire. Desire led to distraction. Distraction weakened discipline. The order believed that a controlled body supported a controlled mind. Yet food was never just fuel. It was a reminder of dependence. No knight grew his own wheat while campaigning. No knight baked his own bread. Eating meant acknowledging the labor of others, and the structure that sustained him. Meals reinforced belonging. There were moments when this system strained. Poor harvests meant thinner pottage. Long sieges meant rationing. Accounts survive of brothers eating horse meat, or mixing flour with ground legumes to stretch supplies. These were not heroic moments, but practical ones. Survival required adjustment. The act of feeding also included fasting. Certain days required reduced portions or abstention. Fasting was not only spiritual, it conserved resources. It aligned religious calendar with agricultural reality. Lean seasons were matched with holy restraint. If you were present at one of these meals, you would notice the lack of decoration. No tablecloths, no ornate dishes. Bowls were simple, spoons were shared or personal. Knives were carried. Everything could be cleaned quickly. Cleanliness mattered. Disease could spread easily in close quarters. After the meal, bowls were washed. Scraps were collected. Nothing edible was thrown away without reason. Leftovers might go to servants or the poor. Charity was expected, but also controlled. Giving too much threatened the house. Giving too little threatened reputation and conscience. Food also marked punishment. A brother who broke rules might be forced to eat on the floor or receive reduced portions. This was humiliating but effective. It reminded him that food was not a right, but a provision. When new recruits joined, they learned these routines quickly. Older brothers corrected posture, pace, and silence. Eating too fast or too slowly drew attention. Attention was rarely welcome. To blend in was to survive. All of this might seem excessive for a meal, but the Templars believed that small habits shaped large outcomes. A knight who could not control his appetite could not be trusted in battle or prayer. Food was training. As you sit quietly imagining this hall, you may begin to wonder how such a rigid system coped with change. What happened when war disrupted supply lines, or when the order expanded faster than its farms could support? How did feeding thousands of men across continents strain the very discipline it was meant to support? You remain within the quiet rhythm of the Templar house. But time has moved forward. The seasons have turned, and the calm predictability of daily meals is now tested by distance and demand. Feeding a single knight in a settled commandery was one thing. Feeding hundreds across scattered territories was something else entirely. What held the system together was not abundance but repetition, planning, and an acceptance of limits. The Templar order expanded quickly during the 12th and 13th centuries. Houses appeared across France, England, Iberia, Italy, and the eastern Mediterranean. Each house was expected to contribute to the whole. Some sent money, others sent grain, oil, wine, or livestock. Food was not just sustenance, it was currency and obligation. A loaf of bread eaten in the Holy Land might begin as wheat planted near a village road in northern France. This required careful accounting. The Templars were known for their financial systems, but those systems were grounded in physical goods. Lists recorded how much grain was owed, how much wine had been pressed, and how many animals could be spared. These lists were dull and detailed, they were also vital. A miscount could mean hunger months later. Transport was slow. Grain traveled by cart to rivers, then by boat to ports, then by ship across seas. Loss was expected. Bags tore ships, leaked, storms delayed arrival, mice found their way into storage. The system did not aim for perfection, it aimed for survival despite loss. In the Eastern Territories, storage became critical. Fortresses and commanderies included granaries built high and dry with thick walls. Grain was poured and leveled, inspected and turned. Someone checked for dampness and rot. This was unglamorous work. It was often done by servants or sergeants, not knights. Yet without it, a knight would have nothing to eat. Fresh food posed a different problem. Vegetables required water, land, and stability. During campaigns, gardens were impossible. Knights relied on dried beans, lentils, chickpeas, and onions. These could be soaked and boiled into filling meals. Meat was salted or dried. Fresh meat was rare unless taken locally. Fish filled some gaps, especially near rivers and coasts. This brought the Templars into regular contact with local markets. They bought food when possible. They paid in coin or promises. Sometimes they requisitioned. This strained relationships. Local farmers might resent armed monks taking grain, even if payment was offered. Food could inflame tensions more quickly than theology. The rule attempted to regulate this. Brothers were instructed not to take more than needed. Waste was forbidden. Excess was sin. Yet need was subjective. A commander responsible for feeding many men might stretch the definition of necessity. Hunger had a way of clarifying priorities. Within the house, meals remained controlled, but signs of strain appeared. Portions might shrink. Meat days might be reduced. The reading during meals continued, even if bowls were thinner. Silence remained. Discipline held, because breaking it did not create food. There were also differences between regions. In England ale was common. In southern Europe, wine dominated. In the Levant water sources varied. Spices sometimes appeared not as luxury, but as preservation or medicine. Garlic was valued for taste and health. Olive oil replaced animal fat where available. Illness complicated everything. A sick brother required different food. Broth instead of pottage, softer bread, less salt. The rule allowed exceptions, but each exception required oversight. Caring for the sick tested the balance between compassion and equality. Other brothers noticed differences. Resentment could grow if exceptions seemed frequent. Food also marked hierarchy in subtle ways. Knights ate meat more often than lower ranks. This reinforced status without ceremony. Yet, knights were expected to share hardship. During shortages, everyone felt the lack. Shared hunger reinforced unity more effectively than speeches. There were moments of celebration. Feast days allowed richer meals. Extra bread, better wine, perhaps roasted meat. These were rare and controlled. Celebration did not mean excess. It meant acknowledgement. Even then, restraint was visible. The contrast mattered. Outside the walls, the order depended on a wider world that did not follow its rules. Harvests failed. Prices rose. Wars disrupted trade. Ships sank. A commander might write letters requesting aid. Months passed before response. In the meantime, men ate what was left. You can imagine a quiet anxiety beneath the routine. A cellar inspected too often. A granary counted again. Food security was never guaranteed. It was maintained through vigilance. This vigilance extended to cooking itself. Cooks followed recipes that were more habit than instruction. Pottage varied by availability. Too thin, and it failed to nourish. Too thick and supplies ran out faster. Experience mattered. An experienced cook was valuable. Firewood was also food-related. Without fuel, nothing could be cooked. Wood had to be gathered, purchased, or stored. In some regions, it was scarce. Meals were planned around fuel availability. Cold meals were sometimes unavoidable. Food discipline shaped behavior beyond meals. Knights learned patience. They learned to accept what was given. Complaining marked weakness. Praise was unnecessary. Eating was duty. This system worked until pressure mounted beyond its capacity. Expansion increased mouths faster than supply. Political tensions affected donations. The very discipline that maintained order also limited flexibility. Rules slowed adaptation. As the 13th century progressed, the order faced increasing scrutiny. Wealth was rumored even when meals remained plain. Outsiders saw lands and resources, not empty bowls. Perception mattered as much as reality. Food had sustained the order for generations. It had trained bodies and habits. But it also tied the order to land politics and economic networks that could turn hostile. You might now wonder how this daily system responded when the order itself came under threat. When accusations, arrests, and sudden loss of property disrupted everything. What happened to the quiet meals when the kitchens were seized, and the rules no longer protected those who ate by them? You are still in the same world of bowls, bread, and rules, but the ground beneath it has begun to shift. The routines that once felt immovable now face forces they were never designed to withstand. Feeding a Templar knight was always an act of planning and restraint, but it depended on stability. When stability vanished, the system revealed both its strength and its limits. The collapse did not arrive with a single dramatic moment. It came quietly through paperwork, orders, and seizures. In the early 14th century, the Templar order was suddenly targeted by royal authority. Properties were confiscated. Commanderies were sealed. Brothers were arrested, often without warning. Kitchens that had prepared the same meals for decades were locked. Granaries were inventoried by outsiders who did not follow the rule. Food was one of the first things to change. A knight in custody no longer ate at a communal table. He ate what jailers provided. Portions were inconsistent. Quality varied. Rules about silence and equality vanished overnight. The controlled predictability of meals gave way to uncertainty. Hunger returned not as discipline but as threat. Some brothers were moved from house to house. Others remained in prisons for months or years. Feeding prisoners was a matter of expense. Authorities were reluctant to provide generous rations. Former knights who had once managed estates now waited for bread. Their training in restraint may have helped them endure, but it did not make hunger easier. Outside the prisons, the lands that had sustained the order continued to produce food, but under new management. Crops still grew, bread was still baked. The difference was destination. Grain that once fed brothers was redirected to royal stores or transferred to other institutions. The labor of tenants continued largely unchanged. Only the recipients shifted. This reveals something important. The food system of the Templars was never truly theirs alone. It was embedded in broader agricultural and economic structures. When authority changed, the system adapted quickly. Bread did not stop being made. Pottage did not disappear. Only the faces at the table changed. For the men who had lived by the rule, this was disorienting. Food had been a symbol of belonging. Eating together under regulation reinforced identity. Isolation broke that reinforcement. A brother eating alone with unfamiliar rations lost more than calories. He lost rhythm. Records from this period are sparse, but hints appear. Complaints about conditions. Requests for better food for the sick. Accounts of illness worsening in confinement. Bodies accustomed to regular simple nourishment struggled with inconsistency. Some brothers were eventually released or transferred to other orders. They had to adapt again. New rules, new meals, new hierarchies. A man who had eaten the same pottage for decades now encountered different kitchens. Adaptation was possible but never easy. What is striking is how little drama appears in the food itself. There are no stories of feasts or starvation on a grand scale. Instead, there is disruption of routine. Meals arriving late, bread thinner than expected, meat absent when it should appear. These small changes accumulated. The fall of the order did not erase its habits immediately. Some commanderies continued similar meal practices under new ownership. The systems were practical. They worked. New masters kept them because they made sense. In this way, the boring details outlived the institution. Feeding a Templar knight was never about glory. It was about maintenance. Bodies had to be sustained, day after day. The discipline that shaped those meals shaped the men. When the structure collapsed, the habits remained in memory, even if not in practice. You can imagine an aging former brother, eating alone, recalling the sound of bowls on wood, the steady reading during meals, the comfort of sameness. Food as memory is powerful. It carries identity long after rules dissolve. In the end, the lesson is quiet. History is often shaped not by dramatic acts, but by systems that persist unnoticed. The Templars are remembered for battles and trials, but their survival depended on kitchens, fields, and careful portions. When those systems were disrupted, the order could not endure. As you reflect on this, you might notice how modern life still relies on similar unnoticed routines. Meals prepared without ceremony, supply chains, taken for granted rules that shape behavior without spectacle. When they function, they fade into the background. When they fail, everything else follows. The story of feeding a Templar knight reminds you that history rests on ordinary acts repeated with discipline. Bread broken in silence may not change the world in a single moment, but over time, it builds the conditions in which everything else becomes possible. You are not in a castle or a battlefield. You are standing beside a slow-moving stream in the English countryside. The ground beneath your feet is dark with moisture and smells faintly of earth, old grass, and animal grease. It is early morning, and the air is cool enough that you pull your arms closer to your body. Around you, the landscape looks peaceful, but the work about to begin is long, repetitive, and essential. Before wool could become clothing, it had to be cleaned. Not gently washed, but aggressively transformed. Raw wool fresh from a sheep was heavy with lanolin dirt, sweat-dried manure, and plant matter. It could not be spun, dyed, or woven until it was washed thoroughly. This process was called fulling or scouring depending on stage and place, and it was one of the most important and least celebrated industries of medieval England. You might imagine wool as soft, clean, and white. Medieval wool was none of those things at first. When fleeces were shorn in spring, they came off in thick, greasy sheets. Shepherds rolled them up and stored them until they could be sold or processed. The smell alone was strong enough to cling to hands and clothing for days. England was famous for its wool. Entire regions depended on it. Yet the wealth associated with wool did not begin in markets or ports. It began here at the water edge, where men, women, and sometimes children performed the slow work of washing. The process started with sorting. Fleeces were opened and shaken. Large debris was removed by hand. Burrs, straw, and clumps of dried mud were picked out. This was tedious and required patience. Poor sorting meant poor washing later. Every step depended on the one before it. Next came soaking. Wool was placed in large tubs or directly into shallow sections of streams. Water was cold. Hot water was rare and reserved for special stages. Cold soaking loosened dirt without setting grease deeper into the fibers. Too much heat too early ruined wool permanently. As you watch hands move through the water, you notice how deliberate the motions are. Wool is pressed, not scrubbed, twisted, not wrung. Rough handling tangles fibers and reduces quality. Experience mattered. A skilled washer could feel when the dirt was loosening. Soap was not what you think of today. Medieval soap existed, but was expensive. Instead, workers used substances like stale urine or alkaline plant ashes. Urine contains ammonia, which breaks down grease. It was collected in households and sold to fullers. This created a network of collection that reached into everyday life. The smell was intense. It clung to hair, skin, and clothing. Washing wool was not glamorous. Workers were marked by their trade, yet it was necessary. Without it, England wool would lose value. After soaking, the wool was beaten. This could be done by foot or by wooden paddles. In later periods, fulling mills powered by water hammers took over, but earlier work relied on muscle. Beating forced out dirt and tightened fibers. It was exhausting, repetitive, and wet. Workers stood for hours in cold water. Feet went numb. Hands cracked. In winter the work continued. Wool could not wait for better weather. Sheep did not pause their growth. Markets demanded supply. You might wonder why anyone chose this work. Many did not choose. It was inherited, learned early, and accepted. Some were paid by weight, others by piece. Pay was modest. Pride came from skill, not comfort. Washing was only the beginning. After scouring, wool had to be rinsed repeatedly. Clean water mattered. Streams used for washing became polluted quickly. Regulations appeared in some towns to control where washing could occur. Downstream users complained of foul water. This led to conflict. Fullers were necessary but unpopular neighbors. Town councils balanced economic need with public health. Rules specified days, locations, and disposal practices. Enforcement varied. Once washed wool was laid out to dry. It was spread on grass racks or lines. Rain was an enemy. Sudden storms could ruin days of work. Workers watched the sky constantly. Drying took time. Damp wool molded easily. Even dried wool retained smell and stiffness. It still required further processing, but it was now usable. The transformation from greasy fleece to workable fiber was slow and invisible to buyers, yet price depended on it. Wool washing also shaped landscapes. Streams were diverted, banks, reinforced paths worn into fields. Temporary structures appeared near water. These left marks long after individuals disappeared. You might notice how this industry connected rural and urban life. Shepherds sold fleeces. Washers cleaned them. Spinners carded them. Weavers turned them into cloth. Dyers colored them. Merchants sold them. Each depended on the previous step. The washer rarely saw the finished cloth. Yet without washing nothing followed. This invisibility defined the work. It was foundational but overlooked. Religion shaped the rhythm too. Certain days were avoided. Fasting days altered labor patterns. Saints' days provided rest when possible. Even so, deadlines often overrode observance. Survival required flexibility. Gender roles were mixed. Women often performed sorting and washing, especially in smaller operations. Men dominated heavier beating work and mill operation later. Children assisted where possible. Entire families were involved. Health consequences were real. Skin infections, joint pain, respiratory issues from fumes were common. There was no formal protection. Knowledge passed through experience. What harmed was endured. As you stand by the stream, you hear water moving steadily. This sound accompanied the work day after day, year after year. It became background noise to effort and fatigue. You may now begin to wonder how this quiet, essential labor influenced England's wealth and power, how something so unpleasant supported trade empires and shaped laws, and what happened when technology slowly changed this work. You are still beside the stream, but time has moved forward in small, careful increments. The motions of washing remain familiar, yet the context around them has begun to change. Wool washing in medieval England did not exist in isolation. It slowly became tied to law, taxation, technology, and national identity. What had once been household labor or small-scale craft grew into something regulated, argued over, and increasingly political. As England wool trade expanded, demand grew not just for raw fleece, but for cleaner, better prepared fiber. Foreign buyers, especially in Flanders and northern Italy, developed expectations. English wool earned a reputation for quality, but only if it arrived properly washed. A single shipment ruined by grease or rot could damage trust built over years. This pressure moved backward along the supply chain. Merchants demanded consistency. Guilds responded by setting standards. Towns began to regulate who could wash wool, where and how. Washing was no longer simply physical labor. It became a controlled process, tied to economic credibility. You might imagine a town meeting where complaints are raised not about war or taxes, but about water. Downstream millers protested that wool washing fouled their wheels. Bakers complained that water drawn after washing tasted bitter. Tanneries argued that their waste was worse and older. Each trade defended its necessity. Town records show fines issued to washers who worked outside permitted areas or times. Some towns required washing only in designated stretches of river. Others banned it within walls altogether. Enforcement was uneven. Economic need often overrode regulation, especially during peak seasons. As the industry grew, larger operations emerged. Fulling mills appeared powered by water. These mills mechanized part of the process using wooden hammers that beat cloth or wool repeatedly. This reduced manual labor but increased capital investment. Mills required permissions, land, and maintenance. The introduction of mills changed labor patterns. Some washers lost work. Others found new roles feeding and maintaining machines. Disputes arose between traditional workers and mill owners. Machines were accused of lowering quality or harming employment. Similar arguments would repeat centuries later in other industries. Yet mills did not replace all washing. Raw wool still required careful scouring before fulling. Machines could not remove all grease or debris. Skilled hands remained essential. Technology altered, but did not erase human labor. Seasonal rhythms intensified. Shearing occurred in spring. Washing followed quickly. Streams became crowded. Temporary camps formed near water. Food had to be brought. Waste accumulated. Short, intense periods of labor replaced slower year-round work. Women continued to play key roles, especially in sorting and rinsing. Their knowledge of fiber quality influenced outcomes. Experienced workers could identify wool from specific regions by touch. This affected pricing and sorting decisions. Payment systems evolved. Piecework became common. Workers were paid by weight washed or batches completed. This encouraged speed, but risked carelessness. Supervisors monitored quality. Disputes over pay were common and recorded. Health issues persisted. Prolonged exposure to cold water weakened bodies. Older workers suffered chronic pain. There was no retirement. When bodies failed, families compensated. Poor relief sometimes supported those injured in the trade. Environmental impact became visible. Rivers near wool centers showed signs of pollution. Fish populations declined. Complaints reached royal courts. In some cases, royal orders restricted washing near certain waterways. Enforcement again varied. Despite these tensions, the wool industry fueled England's economy. Taxes on wool exports funded royal projects, including wars and buildings. Washing labor supported this flow indirectly. But crucially, without clean wool there was no export tax. This created a paradox. Washers were essential yet marginal. Their work generated wealth, but they rarely benefited directly. Their labor remained physically demanding, poorly paid, and socially undervalued. Religion intersected with work in complex ways. Church authorities condemned excessive use of urine, citing cleanliness and morality. Yet monasteries themselves processed wool. Practical needs softened moral judgment. Weather continued to dominate daily experience. Drought reduced water flow. Floods swept away drying wool. Workers adapted moving locations, adjusting schedules. Knowledge of local streams became specialized. As towns grew, washing increasingly shifted outside urban centers. Rural washing stations expanded. This decentralized labor, but increased transport distances. Fleeces traveled further before processing. Roads and carts became part of the system. Children often assisted. They carried bundles, fetched water, and helped spread wool to dry. Their labor was accepted and expected. Skills were learned early. Childhood blended into work without clear boundary. The quiet persistence of this labor shaped landscapes and lives. Generations stood in the same water. Paths worn by feet remained long after work moved elsewhere. Place names preserve traces of fulling and washing even today. You might now sense that washing wool was not merely preparation. It was a negotiation between people, environment, economy, and authority. As England moved toward later medieval periods, these negotiations intensified. The question that remains is how this industry weathered larger shocks. plague, population loss, and shifting markets challenged every system. Did wool washing adapt or collapse under pressure? And how did workers endure when labor itself became scarce? You are still near the water, but the world around you has changed in ways that feel heavier than the slow movement of the stream. The routines of washing wool continue, yet fewer hands now reach into the cold water. The 14th century brings pressures that no amount of experience can fully prepare for. Disease, climate shifts, and economic disruption all press against this quiet industry that once relied on continuity above all else. The arrival of widespread plague reshaped labor everywhere, and wool washing was no exception. Sudden population loss reduced the number of available workers. Entire households vanished. Knowledge that had passed from parent to child was interrupted. Streams that once echoed with constant activity fell silent for stretches of time. For those who remained, work did not become easier. Demand for wool cloth fluctuated, but did not disappear. In some areas, fewer workers meant higher wages. In others, employers resisted change and attempted to hold wages down through local rules. This created tension between workers and authorities. Wool washers found themselves in a rare position. Their labor was difficult to replace quickly. Training took time. Skilled washing affected quality directly. This gave experienced workers leverage, but only briefly. Over time, new systems emerged to control costs and stabilize supply. Landowners and merchants responded by consolidating operations. Larger washing sites replaced scattered ones. Mills gained importance again. Capital investment replaced some labor, but not all. Water-powered hammers continued to beat cloth while hands still sorted, rinsed, and dried fibers. Environmental pressures continued. Rivers already stressed by pollution struggled under reduced maintenance. Flooding damaged banks. Drought limited washing periods. Climate fluctuations, known today as part of a broader cooling trend, shortened seasons and increased risk. Communities adapted as they could. Some shifted washing to smaller tributaries. Others changed schedules, washing at night or during off-seasons. Informal agreements replaced strict regulation in some areas. Survival demanded flexibility. The social status of washers remained low, but recognition of their necessity grew quietly. Complaints against them lessened when alternatives proved impractical. Towns tolerated smells and pollution because trade required it. Necessity reshaped attitudes more effectively than law. Women continued to dominate certain aspects of the work. Their resilience was critical. When male labor was lost, women absorbed additional roles. They negotiated pay, trained children, and maintained routines. Their contributions rarely entered official records but sustained the industry. Children remained part of the workforce. In times of scarcity, their labor became more visible. This was not framed as hardship, but as contribution. Work was survival. Childhood was defined differently. Over generations, technological change slowly reduced the centrality of streamside washing. Improvements in soap production and later mechanization altered processes. Yet, in the medieval period, these changes were gradual. The same basic motions persisted. What ultimately changed was scale and memory. Wool washing no longer occupied central spaces in towns. It moved to margins. As cloth production advanced, attention shifted to weaving, dyeing, and trade. Washing receded into background labor. By the later medieval period, England's identity as a wool-producing power was firmly established. Kings taxed exports, merchants negotiated abroad, wealth flowed upward, the washer remained at the stream. Looking back, it becomes clear that this labor shaped more than cloth. It shaped landscapes, social relations, and economic resilience. It demonstrated how essential work can be both foundational and forgotten. You may reflect on how warmth in a garment depends on unseen effort, how comfort rests on cold water and sore hands, how entire systems rely on those who stand quietly at their edge. In modern times, supply chains remain complex and hidden. Goods arrive clean and finished. The washing happens elsewhere. The lesson remains. Ordinary repetitive labor sustains extraordinary outcomes. As you let this thought settle, you might consider how many other quiet industries shaped the world in similar ways. How many streams bore witness to work that history barely names. You are not in a forum or a senate hall. You are inside a modest Roman house. As evening settles in, the heat of the day has faded, but the walls still hold warmth. Outside, the sounds of the street soften. Inside the house, something small but essential is about to shape the rest of the night. A candle is being lit. Light in a Roman household was never taken for granted. It was counted, measured, rationed, and planned. Every flame represented time, effort, and expense. To understand daily life in ancient Rome, you must understand how light governed it. Not sunlight, which was free and expected, but artificial light, which was limited and deliberate. The Romans used several sources of light. Oil lamps were the most common. Candles existed, but were not universal. They were made from tallow or beeswax. Beeswax burned cleaner and brighter, but was expensive. Tallow was cheaper but smoked and smelled. The choice of candle said something about status, but also about priorities. You are standing near a small table, where a household member prepares the evening. The candle is examined before lighting. Its length matters. A long candle suggests confidence, that the evening will be productive or social. A short candle means restraint. There is no assumption that light will last as long as desired. Activities are planned around it. Romans did not count hours the way you do. Time was flexible. Daylight was divided into 12 hours regardless of season. Night was divided into watches. Artificial light blurred these divisions but did not erase them. A candle did not give you control over time. It gave you a limited extension of it. Lighting a candle was an intentional act. It marked a transition. Work that required precision reading, writing, sewing, careful eating could only happen with light. When the flame went out, those activities stopped. Darkness ended the day. Candles were not left unattended. Fire was a constant risk. Houses were built close together. A dropped candle could destroy a block. Slaves or household members were tasked with monitoring flames. Responsibility was clear. Negligence carried severe consequences. The cost of candles mattered. Beeswax candles were often reserved for religious use or special occasions. Shrines, temples, and funerals consumed large quantities. In homes they were used sparingly. Oil lamps using olive oil were more common for daily use. Even then, oil had to be purchased or produced. Counting candles was not always literal, but it was practical. A household might allocate one candle for an evening meal and conversation. Another might be saved for illness or visitors. Using too many meant waste. Waste was a moral and economic failure. Children learned early not to play near flames. Instructions were repeated. Discipline was enforced. Fire safety was part of upbringing. The memory of city fires loomed large in Roman consciousness. Light shaped social behavior. Guests were welcomed before dark or soon after. Late-night visits required extra expense. Invitations implicitly included lighting cost. Hospitality had limits defined by flame length. Reading at night was a privilege. Scrolls and wax tablets required light. Educated Romans valued study, but often did it during daylight. Night reading was deliberate, and sometimes commented upon. It suggested seriousness or urgency. Writing was even more demanding. Shadows interfered. Hands tired. Eyes strained. A candle placed incorrectly cast flickering light. This slowed work. Many documents were drafted during the day, and copied at night only when necessary. Meals were timed with light. Eating in darkness was unpleasant and risky. Bones, oil, and sharp knives required visibility. Dinner was often the last activity before candles were extinguished. Conversation continued briefly in dim light, then ended. Slaves managed lighting logistics. They trimmed wicks, cleaned lamps, and replaced candles. Their labor made extended evenings possible. Without them, households would darken earlier. This invisible labor shaped elite leisure. Religious practice relied on light symbolism. Candles represented presence and attention. In household shrines, a flame signaled devotion. It was kept burning briefly, then extinguished. Continuous light was rare and costly. Seasonal change mattered. Winter nights were long. Candles burned faster in cold drafts. Oil thickened. Lighting costs rose. Households adapted by sleeping longer or rising later. Daily rhythm shifted. Counting candles also meant anticipating events. Birth, illness, mourning required light at odd hours. Families prepared reserves. Running out during need was shameful and frightening. Fire regulations existed. Neighborhood watch groups monitored night activity. Unusual light drew attention. Too much light at night could signal gatherings suspicious to authorities. Darkness offered privacy, but limited activity. You might notice how limited light shaped thought. Activities were chosen carefully. Idleness was curtailed. Darkness encouraged rest, reflection, or quiet conversation. The modern assumption of endless light did not exist. As you watch the candle burn, you see wax drip slowly. Each drop marks time passing. There is no clock, only observation. When the flame shortens, plans adjust. Someone suggests ending the evening. Agreement follows. This small act of counting light structured Roman domestic life, more than laws or speeches. It set boundaries. It enforced rhythm. It reminded everyone of limits. You may begin to wonder how different households managed this differently, how wealth changed light use, how poorer families adapted without candles at all, and how these practices shaped broader Roman culture and expectations. You are still inside the Roman house, but your attention shifts from the single flame to the wider system that surrounds it. Counting candles was not only a domestic habit, it was part of a broader economy of light that reached from rural farms to crowded city blocks. How a household managed light revealed its resources, discipline, and place within society. In wealthier homes, lighting was more varied. Oil lamps of bronze or clay lined walls and tables. Slaves moved quietly, adjusting wicks, refilling oil, and shielding flames from drafts. Even here, light was not limitless. Oil cost money. Slaves cost money. Waste was frowned upon. Lamps were extinguished room by room as activity ended. Poorer households lived very differently. Many had no candles at all. A single oil lamp might serve an entire family. Some relied solely on daylight. When the sun set, work ended. Evenings were short. Conversation happened in near darkness. Sleeping began early, not from choice but necessity. This difference shaped daily experience. Wealth extended the day, poverty shortened it. Education, leisure, and social interaction depended on light availability. Children, in poor households, learned by day and rested by night. Study after dark was rare. In crowded urban housing, light management became more complex. Apartments known as insulae were stacked close together. Fire risk was constant. Open flames were restricted by landlords. Tenants were warned, fined, or evicted for negligence. Many chose darkness over danger. Oil lamps varied in quality. Some burned cleanly. Others smoked. Soot stained walls, ceilings, and lungs. Archaeological evidence shows heavy soot buildup in many homes. Light came with health costs. Candles themselves required labor to produce. Tallow came from animal fat. Rendering fat was messy and smelled strongly. Wicks were made from twisted fibers. Beeswax required beekeeping. Wax candles were prized for religious and ceremonial use. In homes, they were symbols of care and intention. Markets sold candles by size and type. Buyers inspected them carefully. A poorly made candle burned unevenly. This wasted wax and shortened usable time. Experience taught buyers which makers to trust. Households kept track mentally. There were no written lighting budgets, but habits formed. One candle for this task. One lamp for that room. Over time, these decisions became automatic. Children absorbed them without instruction. Light also shaped gender roles. Evening tasks such as spinning, weaving, and sewing depended on sufficient illumination. Women often worked near lamps while men performed tasks that required less precision. This reinforced divisions of labor. Seasonal festivals altered lighting habits. During celebrations, more light was used. Streets glowed with lamps. Homes stayed lit longer. These moments stood out against normal darkness. They felt special because they were rare. Public lighting existed, but was limited. Torches marked important buildings. Guards carried lamps. Ordinary streets were dark. Night movement was cautious. Light signaled safety and authority. Counting candles also intersected with law. Certain activities were restricted at night. Too much light could attract suspicion. Authorities associated gatherings with unrest. Darkness provided cover but also risk. In rural areas, lighting practices differed again. Farm households rose and slept with the sun. Candles were saved for emergencies. Winter evenings were long but quiet. Storytelling replaced tasks. Memory replaced writing. Religious observance shaped lighting routines. Vigils required light. Temples consumed large quantities of oil and wax. Households imitated these practices on smaller scale. A lit lamp before a shrine signaled devotion. Illness disrupted routines. Caring for the sick required nightlight. Families rationed carefully. Running out was dangerous. Light meant observation, comfort, and control. Death rituals consumed light as well. Bodies were watched through the night. Candles marked respect and prevented decay from being unseen. These moments justified extra expense. You begin to see how light was more than utility. It structured emotion, expectation, and memory. Evenings spent in dim glow-shaped conversation, pace and tone. Silence was common, reflection natural. The absence of constant light encouraged rest. Bodies followed natural rhythms. Insomnia existed, but was understood differently. Darkness was not something to be defeated. It was accepted. As you watch lamps being extinguished, one by one, you sense the household settling. The final flame flickers. Someone decides it is time. The day ends not by clock but by light. This raises a larger question. How did these domestic habits influence Roman thinking about time, discipline and order? And what happened when artificial light slowly became more available in later periods? You are still inside the Roman house, but now the night is deeper and quieter. Most lamps have been extinguished. Only one remains burning low near a household shrine or beside a sleeping child. The decisions that led to this moment were not dramatic. They were habitual. Yet, across years and generations, these habits shaped how Romans understood order, restraint, and the limits of human control. Counting candles trained attention. It required awareness of resources and consequences. Light used now could not be used later. This simple fact encouraged planning. Romans learned early to weigh immediate desire against future need. This mindset extended beyond lighting into food, water, and labor. Scarcity shaped culture. Time itself was understood differently because of light limits. Without constant illumination, activities clustered around daylight. Night was not an extension of day but a different state. This reinforced acceptance of cycles. Work had boundaries. Rest was expected. Modern ideas of productivity would have seemed strange. The household routine of extinguishing lamps marked closure. It ended conversations, tasks, and disputes. Darkness enforced peace. Arguments unresolved were postponed. Silence settled naturally. This influenced social behavior. Urgency was tempered by nightfall. Philosophers commented on this rhythm. Some praised simplicity and rest. Others lamented lost time. Yet all accepted that light defined possibility. There was no illusion of mastery over nature. As Rome grew wealthier, artificial light increased but never became endless. Even emperors managed fire risk and cost. Palaces were lit carefully. Night work existed, but was exceptional. The empire functioned largely by day. Over time, improvements appeared. Better lamps, cleaner oils, more efficient wicks. These extended evenings slightly, but change was gradual. Habits remained. Counting candles persisted. When Rome declined and structures weakened, lighting practices became even more constrained. Trade disruptions affected oil supply. Urban fires made authorities cautious. Darkness reclaimed ground. Later cultures inherited these habits. Medieval households counted candles much like Romans. The legacy endured for centuries. Only with industrial lighting did it truly break. Looking back, you can see how something as small as a candle shaped daily life, thought, and values. Light taught restraint. Darkness taught patience. Together they created rhythm. You may reflect on your own environment, filled with constant light. Nights extended artificially. Boundaries blurred. Sleep resisted. Time feels owned rather than shared. The Roman household did not seek to conquer darkness. It lived alongside it. Candles were companions, not weapons. When they ended, the day ended. This quiet acceptance may be one of the most enduring lessons of ordinary history. Civilization advances not only through conquest and innovation but through daily agreements with limitation. As the final flame fades, you are left in darkness that feels complete, not empty. Tomorrow will come with light, as it always has. And with it, the cycle will begin again, quietly counted and carefully lived. You are not asleep yet. You are lying on a hard surface, wrapped in a thin blanket inside a wooden or stone structure that smells of smoke, leather, and damp earth. Outside the walls, the land is dark and unfamiliar. Inside the fort, men try to rest while remaining alert. This is sleeping on watch, and it is nothing like rest. Frontier forts existed at the edges of control. In Roman provinces, medieval borderlands, and later imperial frontiers, these forts marked lines that were never fully secure. Soldiers stationed here lived with uncertainty. Their nights were shaped by rules, routines, and quiet fear. Sleep was permitted, but never complete. You are assigned a watch. This means your night is divided. You sleep in short stretches. Someone wakes you quietly when it is your turn. There is no bell sometimes, only a touch or whispered name. You rise carefully, because noise carries at night. The body learns this pattern reluctantly. Deep sleep is rare. Dreams are shallow. Every sound pulls you back to awareness. Wind through grass, footsteps of animals, distant water, all demand attention. You learn to distinguish familiar sounds from unfamiliar ones. This skill keeps you alive. Sleeping arrangements are basic. Beds are straw pallets or wooden benches. In colder regions, soldiers sleep close for warmth. Personal space is limited. Gear is kept within reach. Weapons are never far. Even in sleep, hands know where to find them. The fort itself is designed to support this rhythm. Walls funnel sound. Gates creak deliberately. Towers provide vantage points. Firelight is limited to avoid visibility from outside. Darkness is both protection and threat. Watch schedules vary. Some forts divide the night into watches. Others rotate individuals. Experience shapes assignments. New soldiers struggle more. Veterans know how to rest quickly. They learn to sleep when allowed without complaint. Food affects sleep. Heavy meals make waking harder. Light meals leave hunger. Balance is imperfect. Rations are designed for endurance, not comfort. Night hunger is common. Weather plays a role. Cold stiffens joints. Heat brings insects. Rain soaks bedding. Snow muffles sound, making detection harder. Each condition alters vigilance. The mental strain is subtle. There is rarely action. Most nights pass without incident. This creates boredom. Boredom dulls alertness. Discipline counters this. Soldiers are trained to treat every watch as real. Punishments for sleeping on watch are severe. This rule exists across cultures and eras. Sleeping when assigned to watch threatens everyone. Even accidental sleep is punished. Fear reinforces vigilance. Yet soldiers do sleep on watch. Exhaustion wins sometimes. Heads nod, eyes close briefly. Guilt follows. The line between rest and failure is thin. Camaraderie helps. Soldiers cover for each other quietly. A nudge, a cough, a shared glance. Officially this is forbidden. Unofficially it is survival. Time moves strangely at night. Without light it stretches. Minutes feel long. Counting steps, breaths, or stars helps. Some recite prayers or songs silently. Anything to stay awake. Equipment checks fill time. Adjusting straps, sharpening blades, touching familiar objects. Routine grounds the mind. It keeps panic away. The frontier amplifies imagination. Stories circulate. Past attacks, rumored enemies, unknown creatures. At night, these stories feel close. The mind fills darkness with possibility. Yet most danger comes from small things. A loose board, a dropped tool, a misheard signal. Training focuses on procedure. When in doubt, follow the routine. Morning relief is quiet. Watches end without ceremony. Soldiers return to bedding if time allows. Sleep comes unevenly. Day duties follow regardless. This cycle repeats. Weeks, months, years. The body adapts. Aging soldiers carry fatigue differently. Some leave service early. Others endure. Sleeping on watch shapes character. It teaches restraint, awareness, acceptance of discomfort. It also leaves marks. Many veterans struggle with sleep later. The habit of light rest persists. As you lie there between watches, you may wonder how long such a life can be sustained, how these nights affect judgment, morale, and loyalty. And what happens when the frontier shifts or the fort is abandoned? You are still in the fort, but the night has deepened, and the patterns of watch life begin to reveal their full complexity. The first section introduced the basic routines, but now we consider the interplay of logistics, hierarchy, and endurance that shapes survival in frontier forts across centuries and regions. Sleeping on watch is not just about being awake, it is about managing the body, mind, and environment simultaneously. The assignment of watches is deliberate. Commanders divide the night into periods, sometimes 2 hours, sometimes longer, depending on manpower, perceived threat, and season. Each soldier learns their slot and is expected to perform consistently. Rotations balance alertness and fairness, but fatigue inevitably accumulates. A veteran may take the hardest slot, deepest in the night, because younger soldiers need experience without overwhelming strain. This management of human energy was as crucial as fortifications or weapons. Food and drink influence, sleep readiness and alertness. Soldiers consume small rations before their watch. Too much food induces drowsiness. Too little creates hunger distractions. Water or diluted wine is available but limited, as carrying containers quietly through the fort at night risks noise and exposure. In winter, warm broth may be issued to maintain body temperature, while in summer, cool water or fruit supplements sustain energy. Commanders keep meticulous track of rations because mismanagement could degrade vigilance across the night. The architecture of the fort itself shaped sleep cycles. Bunks and straw mattresses were arranged to minimize noise when soldiers rose. Floorboards were sometimes loose, requiring constant familiarity to move without detection. Doors, gates, and ladders were strategically creaked or padded. Towers offered vantage points, but ascending and descending them quietly demanded careful training. A misstep could alert the enemy, or worse, an inquisitive guard nearby. Soldiers quickly learned the tactile geography of their surroundings, committing every obstacle to muscle memory. Weather complicated the equation further. Rain-soaked bedding and muffled footsteps. Wind through wooden palisades created phantom signals. Snow amplified sounds but obscured visibility. Soldiers adapted by layering clothing, adjusting watch posts and timing steps with natural sounds. Mud, frost, or ice transformed simple movement into a deliberate act, making fatigue more pronounced. Night work in harsh weather tested both body and mind. Many fort records note injuries not from combat but from slips, frostbite, or exhaustion. Sleep deprivation shaped cognition and behavior. Soldiers were trained to recognize micro-rest, closing eyes briefly, head nods, shallow breathing, as a controlled response rather than negligence. The most experienced knew how to exploit these micro-rest periods without endangering the fort. Some developed silent mnemonic exercises, counting steps, observing wind shifts, or tracking the phases of the moon. These mental routines allowed vigilance while keeping drowsiness at bay. Hierarchy played a subtle but essential role in nighttime order. Officers remained awake longer, to monitor junior soldiers, and ensure protocols were followed. Misconduct, like sleeping through a watch, carried severe consequences. Reduction of rations, reassignment to the coldest or most exposed posts, or formal reprimand. Yet, informal accommodations existed. Soldiers would cover for comrades briefly in emergencies, especially during long and eventful nights. This dual system of rigid rules and practical compromise defined daily frontier life. Beyond the physical and hierarchical factors, boredom and monotony exerted psychological pressure. Many nights passed without incident, yet the anticipation of attack remained. Soldiers coped through repetitive tasks, inspecting weapons, tightening leather straps, sharpening blades, or even rehearsing drills silently. The repetition was mentally protective. It anchored attention and warded off panic. A quiet fort could be as demanding as one under siege, because the mind remained alert while the body struggled to rest. Communication across the fort was also a nightly challenge. Signals, whistles, calls, drum beats, or torches were used sparingly to avoid detection by outsiders. Each signal carried specific meaning: patrol relief, suspected movement, or alert to senior officers. Learning these signals became an essential part of training. Misinterpretation could lead to false alarms or worse. Even sleep had to be responsive to these systems. Cultural and seasonal factors shaped routines too. In medieval Europe, for instance, religious observances such as vigils and feast days altered watch schedules. Soldiers sometimes combined spiritual and practical attentiveness, praying quietly while monitoring perimeter. Festivals increased traffic near forts, adding noise and the need for additional vigilance. Nightlife was rarely uniform. It adapted to the rhythm of the broader community, while maintaining the fort's defensive priorities. Health consequences were cumulative. Chronic fatigue, joint stiffness, respiratory issues from damp bedding, and gastrointestinal problems from ration monotony were common. Some soldiers became desensitized to discomfort. Others broke under strain. Experience mattered. Veterans could manage multiple nights of partial sleep, whereas new recruits often struggled, making rotation systems essential to survival. Even minor environmental details affected routines. The angle of moonlight, rustle of leaves, distant river sounds, or nocturnal animal activity all became data points for alert soldiers. Distinguishing benign sounds from potential threats demanded constant practice. Night vision, auditory acuity, and situational memory were cultivated deliberately, forming a skill set as essential as swordsmanship or archery. You might imagine, then, how long-term exposure to these patterns altered not only performance but perspective. Soldiers internalized a heightened sense of risk and a precise understanding of temporal flow. Daytime and nighttime became functionally distinct in perception and habit. Sleep was not a right, it was a tactical tool, rationed carefully like food or weapons. As you consider this world, you may begin to wonder how soldiers sustained morale and cohesion in such conditions, how they endured years of disrupted sleep, repeated monotony, and constant alertness without succumbing to despair, and how these small, repetitive acts of endurance influenced broader military effectiveness on the frontier. You are still in the fort, but now the night has passed into early morning. The darkness is thinning, and the first hints of light stretch across the horizon. Those who endured the long watches begin to stir, yet the lessons of the night linger. Sleeping on watch is an exercise not only in endurance, but in the discipline of timing, perception, and collective responsibility. Its impact reaches far beyond the individual night. Relief arrives quietly, one soldier whispers, another nods, and the exhausted guard relinquishes the post. Sleep that follows is deep and irregular, a contrast to the fragmented rest experienced hours before. Some use this time to recover physically, others mentally rehearse the night's observations. Minor incidents, unusual sounds, or perceived threats are logged in memory, forming a continuous record of vigilance. This silent diary helps refine future performance. Morning routines are deliberate. Soldiers wash, eat, inspect equipment, and share observations from the night. Reports are oral and succinct. A minor sound in the northeast, a door squeak on the west wall, these are noted and remembered. Even uneventful nights teach lessons about attention, endurance, and environmental cues. Over time, this knowledge accumulates into expertise that new recruits must absorb. The physical consequences of night labor persist. Chronic fatigue, stiff joints, and subtle cognitive impairment accompany even the most experienced soldiers. Yet these conditions create a cadre trained in resilience. The hardships of repeated watch cultivate patience, focus, and situational awareness. A soldier who has mastered fragmented sleep and quiet vigilance is better equipped to react when genuine threat arises. Sleep schedules during peacetime fort life reveal a paradox: repetition breeds both mastery and monotony. Soldiers learn to anticipate threats that never arrive. Boredom, while mentally taxing, reinforces routine. Training and enforced discipline become tools not only for survival, but for managing human behavior. The fort operates as a microcosm of controlled order. Predictable patterns of sleep, wakefulness, and responsibility maintain cohesion. Camaraderie deepens as a byproduct. Soldiers support one another through small informal acts, adjusting blankets, sharing tips on micro-rest, or quietly signaling danger. Trust grows from reliance on others' vigilance. Nighttime labor reinforces social bonds, even in silence. Bonds forged in shared discomfort have a lasting impact on morale and unit cohesion. The fort itself, once merely a collection of walls and gates, becomes a stage for adaptive human behavior. Design accommodates both security and human endurance. Towers, gates, bunk arrangements, and pathways reflect centuries of learned experience. Architecture and habit intertwine. Soldiers internalize the space and its demands. Knowledge of the fort becomes tacit, passed from one generation of recruits to the next. Beyond the immediate fort, these nightly routines shape broader military effectiveness. Armies composed of soldiers trained in fragmented sleep, vigilance, and environmental awareness perform differently than those lacking these experiences. The quiet, repetitive labor of night watch underpins readiness for larger campaigns, surprise attacks, or prolonged sieges. Small acts of endurance create structural advantage. Even after leaving service, veterans carry the imprint of nocturnal discipline. Sleep patterns, attention to detail, and risk awareness remain altered. Life outside the fort feels different. Ordinary nighttime routines seem insufficient or too easy. Civilization beyond the frontier is brighter, safer, and less regulated, but veterans remain conditioned to measure time and risk in terms of observation, preparedness, and duty. You may now reflect on the unseen power of endurance, habit, and attention. The soldiers' nights were monotonous, unglamorous, and often boring, but they sustained security, structured life, and cultivated skill. The frontier fort demonstrates how history often turns not on dramatic events, but on quiet repetition, measured attention, and disciplined action. It is a reminder that small, routine acts of vigilance ripple outward, shaping societies, institutions, and human behavior in ways easily overlooked. As dawn breaks over the fort, the day begins with ordinary duties, but the lessons of the night endure. Order depends on repetition, survival depends on awareness, and even the smallest acts of discipline leave a lasting mark on history. You are stepping into a bustling medieval market, not in a grand city square, but in a modest town where the rhythm of commerce dictates life. Stalls of rough-hewn wood and cloth canvas line uneven streets. The air is thick with smells: fresh bread, salted fish, tallow, herbs and livestock. Noise vibrates through the space: vendors calling, haggling in clipped tones, carts squeaking, the occasional shout of a dog or child. Yet beneath this apparent chaos lies an invisible order, a web of customs, rules and quiet enforcement that ensures survival for both sellers and buyers. Medieval markets were not unregulated free-for-alls. Each town established charters and statutes specifying days of trade, permissible goods, and market locations. These laws were often written, but much enforcement relied on custom. A buyer learned early that a stall might open later in the day, that certain spices would always be sold near the center, that the baker would set prices by weight rather than by loaf. Knowledge of these unwritten rules ensured smoother transactions and reduced conflict. Merchants carried out subtle surveillance on one another. A stall selling cheese had to adhere to precise weights and measures. Shortchanging a customer could provoke legal action, or, more commonly, social retaliation. The buyer might spread word that a seller was dishonest, or local authorities might impose fines. Reputation mattered as much as the goods themselves. Over time, consistency and adherence to local custom created trust, without which the market could not function. Markets were often segregated by commodity. Meat sellers clustered near one entrance, produce in the center, cloth at the far end. Livestock markets were separated by pens to control disease and movement. This segregation was not just practical, but enforced. Guards, constables and town officials monitored compliance. Deviating from assigned areas could result in a reprimand or expulsion. Buyers and sellers internalized these rules, accepting them as part of the system. You notice that hours of trade were also controlled. Markets were generally held on specific days of the week, often aligned with religious observances. Saints' feast days might halt trading, while designated market days saw crowds surge early in the morning. Extended trading after sunset was limited, as artificial lighting was costly and risky. Town charters often dictated closing times, with penalties for vendors who overstayed. This created a rhythm for the entire community. Production, transport and consumption were all timed to the market cycle. Weighing and measuring were central to fairness. Scales, weights, and standardized measures were supervised by appointed officials or guild members. A merchant suspected of mismeasuring risked fines, loss of goods, or public humiliation. Even seemingly minor infractions, selling ale too weak, bread too light, wool shorn inadequately, were noticed. Such rules enforced economic stability and consumer confidence. Haggling itself was bounded by subtle etiquette. Excessive pressure, public insult, or aggressive gestures were discouraged, though tolerated to some degree. Social norms enforced decorum. A merchant who verbally abused a customer might be subject to fines or shunned by neighbors. Likewise, a buyer who attempted deception risked the same penalties. Market behavior was a carefully choreographed negotiation, underpinned by local expectations. Guilds played a hidden but significant role. Artisans and traders often belonged to these organizations, which regulated production, quality and access. Membership conferred privileges and responsibilities. A guild might guarantee a stable price range, dictate hours of operation, and mediate disputes. Non-members who attempted to sell outside these structures could be fined or expelled. The guild system added another layer of invisible order, blending economic control with social hierarchy. Markets were also sites of surveillance and conflict management. Constables and bailiffs monitored for theft, brawls and disorderly conduct. Yet, not every rule was formalized. Some relied entirely on community enforcement. Neighbors observing, whispers spreading, reputation at stake. Social pressure worked alongside legal oversight. Compliance was incentivized through a mixture of fear, reward and habit. Seasonality shaped both supply and rules. Perishable goods, fish, dairy, fresh produce, demanded swift trade. Preserved items, salted meats, dried grains, wool, could be stored, but were still subject to charters controlling when they could be sold. Towns sometimes issued temporary regulations in response to scarcity, adjusting prices or rationing goods. This adaptation demonstrates the flexible but rule-bound nature of medieval commerce. You notice that even mundane market details carried significance. Location of a stall, positioning of a scale, choice of words in haggling, all indicated knowledge of proper conduct. A newcomer quickly learned that ignoring these subtleties could result in economic loss or social disfavor. In this way, market rules were both explicit and tacit, creating a layered system that allowed commerce to flourish despite limited enforcement infrastructure. The invisible structures extended to transport and storage. Carts and wagons had designated entry points. Merchants bringing goods from distant towns had to follow assigned routes and pay tolls. Missteps could trigger inspections, fines, or seizure of goods. Even before reaching the market, the path to trade was governed by rules that ensured predictability and minimized conflict. As night approaches, you see traders preparing to close. Goods are packed carefully, scales reset, leftover produce stored. Officials make rounds, noting compliance and irregularities. Even in departure, the rhythm and rules persist. The market is a temporary but highly structured community, dissolving daily yet rebuilt the next morning. You may now reflect on how the mundane weight of bread, placement of a stall, timing of a market day, shaped the survival of commerce and order in medieval towns. The invisible rules governed more than trade. They structured society, maintained fairness, and built trust, all without modern enforcement systems. You remain in the medieval market. But now the focus shifts from individual stalls to the broader social and legal networks that allowed these markets to function. The invisible rules you observed in Section 1 extend beyond simple conduct. They intertwine with hierarchy, economy, and the enforcement of both, ensuring that commerce persists despite the chaos of human behavior. One key element was the role of market officials. Towns employed constables, bailiffs, and market reeves, whose responsibilities included monitoring weights, measures, and adherence to local charters. Their presence was subtle but constant. They walked among stalls, observed transactions, and occasionally tested goods or scales. Their power depended on both authority and reputation. A single inspection could enforce months of compliance, and their judgments often set local precedent. Merchants internalized their oversight. The awareness of being observed influenced daily practice as much as any written law. Guilds exerted hidden influence. Membership regulated quality and consistency across trades. A baker could not simply alter loaf size at will. Guild regulations specified weight, texture, and ingredients. Cloth merchants adhered to quality grades, dye standards, and fiber preparation dictated by guild statutes. Violations could result in fines, temporary suspension, or exclusion from markets altogether. Membership conveyed status and access, but also imposed constraints, boundaries that structured behavior without constant supervision. Non-members who tried to bypass these rules risked not only sanctions but economic isolation. Seasonality amplified complexity. Markets adapted to the rhythms of agriculture and weather. Spring and summer brought fresh produce, milk, and eggs. Autumn brought preserved grains, dried fruits and wool. Winter markets focused on salted meats, preserved fish, and durable goods. Officials and guilds adjusted regulations accordingly, specifying times and locations for sale. They sometimes issued temporary price controls during scarcity, to prevent exploitation. Observant merchants timed their arrival, stall setup, and pricing strategy to align with these subtle regulations. Success depended on understanding not just the letter of the law, but its seasonal application. Social monitoring extended beyond officials. Reputation was a potent form of regulation. Word of mouth spread quickly, particularly in smaller towns. A merchant accused of shortchanging a customer or selling inferior goods could find business curtailed for weeks. Conversely, consistent quality earned loyalty. Even transient customers contributed to this network. Rumors from neighboring villages could influence a seller's reputation beyond their immediate market. Compliance, therefore, was both a matter of legality and social necessity. You notice that bargaining itself was bound by unspoken expectations. While haggling was expected, excessive pressure or verbal abuse risked social censure. Negotiation was a delicate balance, assertive enough to secure a fair price, respectful enough to maintain ongoing relationships. Buyers and sellers relied on mutual understanding and shared customs. These subtle behaviors reinforced cohesion and minimized conflict without formal enforcement. Physical organization of the market also enforced order. Goods were grouped by type to prevent confusion, reduce disputes, and facilitate inspections. Livestock pens prevented disease spread, while separate entry and exit routes managed traffic flow. Even minor deviations, such as setting up a stall in the wrong location, could lead to confrontation or formal penalties. The spatial arrangement of the market became a form of regulation itself, guiding behavior and reducing friction. Markets were also arenas for negotiation beyond buying and selling. Merchants discussed contracts, partnerships, and supply chains. Observing transactions and patterns allowed experienced traders to anticipate shortages, adjust prices, and cultivate advantageous relationships. Knowledge of rules, both explicit and tacit, provided strategic advantage. Ignorance could be costly, not just economically but socially. Weather and environmental conditions shaped enforcement and adaptation. Rain or snow slowed traffic and increased the risk of disputes. Drought or crop failure prompted temporary regulatory adjustments. Markets were flexible yet rule-bound, adapting to circumstance while preserving underlying structures. Traders who mastered this balance thrived, while those who ignored it often failed. Children and apprentices participated subtly. They carried goods, observed transactions, and learned norms. Their early exposure ensured continuity of market knowledge and compliance with rules. These invisible lessons reinforced community memory, passing expertise from one generation to the next without formal education. As you step back, the market reveals itself as more than a site of trade. It is a finely tuned system of social and economic order, sustained by a combination of law, custom, reputation, and shared understanding. Each individual act, measuring, bargaining, arranging goods, interacts with countless others to maintain cohesion and reliability. Without these invisible rules, chaos would overwhelm opportunity. You may now reflect on the remarkable resilience of medieval commerce. How ordinary people internalized complex regulations, how tacit knowledge governed behavior, and how everyday adherence to custom ensured survival for both traders and the wider community. You might also consider how these patterns echo in modern markets, where invisible rules, social monitoring, and shared norms continue to underpin daily transactions. You are still in the medieval market. But now the day draws to a close. Stalls are being packed up, carts rolled away, and vendors tally their earnings. Observing the market at this quiet moment reveals the full weight of the invisible rules that sustained it. The routines, hierarchies, and subtle enforcement you have followed in sections 1 and 2 now manifest in the outcomes of daily commerce, trust, stability, and social cohesion. Market officials make their final rounds. Weights are checked once more, and any deviation is noted for follow-up on the next market day. Merchants adjust practices in response to fines, guidance, or neighborly warnings. Even small infractions, an overcharged loaf or mismeasured wool, can ripple outward, affecting reputation, trade relationships, and future profits. Compliance is both immediate and cumulative. Each day builds experience, knowledge, and social capital. Guilds exert influence even in closure. Apprentices and journeymen review the day's transactions, receiving instruction on proper procedures, etiquette, and enforcement norms. Knowledge transfers through observation, repetition, and correction. Over time, these routines ensure that traders maintain the expected standards, preserving quality across generations. Membership in a guild conveys not only privilege but also responsibility, a silent framework that structures behavior far beyond the written rules. The interplay between law and custom becomes evident. Charters and statutes provide formal boundaries, but social enforcement, reputation, gossip, and collective expectation carries equal or greater weight. A merchant who violates trust may face minimal legal consequences yet be ostracized socially. Conversely, adherence to subtle expectations like proper haggling behavior or stall placement fosters social acceptance and economic advantage. The market survives not merely through regulation but through collective understanding and habit. Seasonal rhythms continue to guide practices. Certain goods are stored for winter, others traded rapidly to avoid spoilage. Price fluctuations, adjusted to availability and scarcity, reflect both legal allowances and customary practice. Traders must anticipate these shifts, learning to balance supply, demand, and community norms. Survival depends on predicting not just economic but social consequences. The market is a dynamic network in which rules, adaptation, and foresight intersect. Children and apprentices carry lessons forward, ensuring continuity. They observe disputes, watch officials, and assist in daily operations. Their learning is embedded in practice, how to measure accurately, treat customers respectfully, and navigate the complex web of expectations. The market functions as a living classroom, producing participants who internalize structure alongside skill. You begin to see the larger significance of these hidden rules. Markets are more than economic hubs. They are microcosms of societal order. They teach trust, fairness, and negotiation. They demonstrate the importance of observation, compliance, and subtle influence. They show how ordinary labor and adherence to custom sustain not only commerce but the broader community. As the market empties, You reflect on the delicate balance that keeps it functioning. Every transaction, every measurement, every gesture contributes to a larger system of order. The quiet persistence of adherence to both written law and tacit custom shapes not only the market, but the moral and social fabric of the town itself. It is an unglamorous but essential engine of stability, proving that history is often made not in grand battles or declarations, but in ordinary, disciplined human activity. Finally, you might consider modern parallels. Supply chains, consumer trust, and regulatory frameworks all depend on invisible rules and social compliance. The medieval market's survival demonstrates how deeply ordinary human practices, care, attention, observation, and ethical behavior can structure society. The market fades with the day, but its lessons endure. Order is maintained through shared understanding, and communities thrive when even the smallest actions follow agreed-upon norms. You are standing in the cobbled streets of a medieval town, the air heavy with the scent of bread, livestock, and smoke. The clatter of carts and chatter of townspeople fills the day, yet within this commotion there exists a figure whose work is both public and strangely invisible. The town crier. He is not merely a herald of announcements. He is an instrument of communication, enforcement, and social cohesion. Understanding his role illuminates the subtle ways medieval towns maintained order and shared information in a world without print, postal systems, or modern technology. A town crier is appointed by the local authorities, or, in some cases, by the guilds. His position is official, yet his labor is largely unpaid or minimally compensated. The crier carries a bell, horn, or staff to draw attention. The ringing is necessary because the audience is diverse. Merchants, peasants, apprentices, and travelers occupy different spaces and pay attention differently. The crier's effectiveness depends not on volume alone but on timing, clarity, and repetition. Announcements range widely. Market openings, tax collection dates, lost property, guild regulations, proclamations from lords or monarchs, all are within his remit. Yet the act of proclamation is more than mechanical. The crier must memorize content accurately, modulate voice to reach the maximum number of people, and adjust phrasing depending on the setting. A proclamation read at the market differs subtly from one at a religious festival or near the city gates. The crier is both messenger and mediator, translating official directives into practical information for daily life. Beyond announcements, the crier serves as a public monitor. He observes crowd behavior, notices disputes, and sometimes intervenes by signaling authorities. His presence deters petty crime, helps enforce guild regulations, and provides a channel for reporting grievances. He operates at the intersection of authority and community, maintaining order while remaining a familiar figure rather than an enforcer of brute force. Training for this role is practical. The crier learns articulation, projection, and memorization. He must maintain stamina, standing hours in varying weather, walking extensive circuits, and repeating announcements multiple times without error. Accuracy is crucial. Misinformation can lead to disputes, unrest, or fines. Failure carries consequences not just socially but legally, since the crier represents the town's authority. The crier's work is also highly ritualized. Bells are rung in pattern sequences, announcements follow established phrasing, and routes are predetermined. Regularity reassures townspeople. When the bell rings at a certain hour, citizens understand that information will follow, and that daily life is proceeding under the guidance of structured authority. In this way, repetition itself becomes a stabilizing force, embedding order into the rhythms of town life. Seasonal changes influence the crier's labor. Winter winds, icy streets, and shorter days reduce circulation, forcing adjustments in routes and timing. Festivals, harvests, and fairs increase the volume of announcements. Emergencies such as fires, outbreaks of disease, or military threats demand rapid adaptation. The crier must be both consistent and responsive, balancing routine with flexibility in a dynamic urban environment. You begin to notice the subtle hierarchy within the town. The crier is lower in status than guildmasters, magistrates, or clergy, yet his function is indispensable. Without his voice, announcements may not reach those who rely on them. Markets may operate inefficiently, taxes may be unpaid, and regulations may be ignored. His work is unglamorous but critical. The town depends on his endurance, precision, and visibility. Children, apprentices, and townspeople learn from observing the crier. The repeated announcement of rules, dates, and civic expectations serves an educational purpose. Behavior is guided not only by fear of formal punishment, but also by knowledge of public expectation. The crier is a living conduit of social norms, reinforcing order silently yet effectively through presence and repetition. Even the crier's dress matters. Bright or distinctive garments, often bearing town insignia, help signal authority. The visual cue complements the auditory signal, allowing citizens to recognize the source of announcements instantly. Costume and ritual together amplify credibility, ensuring compliance even when enforcement personnel are absent. You may begin to realize how integral this role is to the maintenance of town life. The crier represents both communication and regulation, binding the population through shared awareness. Each bell toll, each carefully enunciated word, structures experience and organizes behavior, embedding governance into daily life through routine rather than coercion. As you watch the crier move through the streets, repeating his announcements, you may wonder, how did towns ensure accuracy across multiple criers or successive days? How did citizens adapt when messages conflicted with personal interest or understanding? And how did such an unassuming laborer shape the rhythm and reliability of urban life for centuries? You continue following the town crier, now gaining a deeper sense of the complexity behind what at first appears a simple task. His work is not just vocal, it is strategic, ritualized and intertwined with social networks, local hierarchies, and civic expectations. Understanding the second layer of his labor reveals how communication, authority, and habit combine to sustain medieval urban life. The crier's route is carefully planned. Streets are prioritized based on population density, commercial importance, and visibility. Marketplaces, churches, and town halls are repeated destinations, ensuring critical announcements reach the largest audiences. Narrow alleys and peripheral neighborhoods are visited more sparingly, sometimes by deputies or apprentices, who repeat announcements with guidance from the main crier. The efficiency of this circulation affects not only knowledge dissemination, but also civic compliance. Those who do not hear the announcements may inadvertently violate rules, pay taxes late, or miss deadlines, demonstrating how the crier's labor directly supports administrative cohesion. Memory is central to the role. Written notices exist but are limited, and often inaccessible to the illiterate majority. The crier memorizes proclamations, sometimes adapting phrasing to match local idioms or dialects. Misstatements can cause confusion or disputes. Accuracy is reinforced through repetition. Announcements are made multiple times in the same area to ensure retention. Town records sometimes mention errors or disputes stemming from poor delivery, indicating the high stakes of this ostensibly mundane work. Social dynamics shape how the crier is received. Citizens respect his authority because it is both visual and auditory, but they also test boundaries. Crowds may interrupt announcements with questions, complaints, or jest. The crier must navigate these interactions delicately, balancing patience and firmness. Over time, townspeople internalize civic norms, understanding that the crier embodies law, ritual, and communication simultaneously. His public role reinforces private behavior, even in absence. His presence echoes through expectation. Guilds and civic officials depend heavily on criers. Announcements about new regulations, craft restrictions, tax assessments, or market schedules circulate efficiently, only because of this intermediary labor. Without the crier, merchants might violate statutes unknowingly, apprentices could misunderstand obligations, and communal disorder could increase. The crier becomes a linchpin, a human interface between authority and populace, translating policy into practice. Seasonality continues to influence work. In winter, shorter days limit visibility, and sound carries differently through cold air, affecting volume and clarity. Summer brings crowds and noise from festivals or fairs, requiring sharper projection and repeated circuits. Inclement weather may delay announcements, force route changes, or require improvisation. The crier adapts, constantly evaluating conditions to maintain coverage. This flexibility underlines that even routine work is dynamic and context-dependent. Children and apprentices play a subtle supporting role. They shadow the crier, learning routes, phrasing, and timing. Their participation ensures continuity and creates a practical apprenticeship system. Knowledge transfer is embedded in practice rather than formal education. Young observers absorb civic norms, compliance expectations, and social hierarchy through daily exposure to the crier's routines. The crier's labor also supports informal networks of information. News, rumors, and market intelligence flow alongside official announcements. Citizens interpret and sometimes challenge information, creating a dialogue that balances authority and local practice. The crier remains neutral yet crucial in this network, His labor structures the flow of information, making the town intelligible, predictable, and ordered. Over time, the crier's work shapes perception of time and events. Market openings, tax deadlines, and religious observances are synchronized through his voice. Town life acquires a rhythm. Citizens plan their day around repeated signals, and the crier enforces temporal regularity without coercion. Daily experience becomes ordered through repetition, habit, and audibility, demonstrating how ordinary labor produces systemic stability. You may reflect on how much relies on one individual's consistent effort. The town crier's presence, memory, voice, and endurance maintain awareness, compliance, and civic cohesion. His work is invisible in formal histories, yet indispensable in practical life. Through repetition and observation, he sustains not only communication but social order, blending the mundane with the profound. As the day advances, you may begin to wonder, how did multiple criers coordinate across larger towns? How were conflicts between messages resolved? And what does the persistence of this labor tell us about the reliance on routine, repetition, and human agency in maintaining community life? The day is drawing to a close, and you watch the town crier complete his rounds. His bell tolls one final time, announcements have been delivered, and the streets begin to quiet as merchants pack up stalls and townspeople return home. Yet the significance of his labor becomes clearer when observed in this concluding moment. The town functions smoothly, not because of dramatic events, but because of countless small repeated actions that sustain communication, trust, and order. The crier's work bridges authority and populace. Written proclamations may exist, but literacy is limited. Visual signals are insufficient. Only the crier's voice, combined with ritualized presence, ensures that messages reach those who need them. Compliance is reinforced not through coercion alone, but through recognition of shared expectation. Townspeople know the message is official, and they internalize it. Even the smallest households, distant from guild halls or market squares, are connected through his labor. Repetition and accuracy are the invisible threads holding the town together. Each announcement, each bell toll, each careful phrasing strengthens the network of knowledge. Errors are rare, but consequential, demonstrating the delicate balance on which daily civic life depends. Apprentices and deputies ensure continuity, creating redundancy in information flow. Social cohesion is maintained, not by force, but by shared understanding and anticipation of repeated signals. The crier's labor also reinforces hierarchy in structure. Officials rely on him to transmit directives. Guilds depend on him to notify members. Citizens orient their behavior according to his schedule. In this way, mundane daily labor translates into systemic stability. The town functions efficiently because the role of a single diligent individual is respected, internalized, and amplified through repetition and observation. Even when emergencies arise, the crier becomes a critical conduit. Fires, outbreaks of disease, or approaching military threats require rapid dissemination of instructions. His presence transforms urgency into orderly response. Citizens act because they recognize both the authority of the message and the expectation of compliance. The effectiveness of emergency response, therefore, rests upon the persistence of ordinary labor performed faithfully day after day. Over time, the crier shapes not only behavior but perception. Market hours, civic deadlines, and religious observances are synchronized through his routine. Life acquires rhythm. Citizens expect certain signals at certain times, and their actions align accordingly. The town's temporal order is a direct product of repeated vocal labor, illustrating how mundane routines embed themselves into the structure of community life. You begin to understand the quiet power of repetition, habit, and presence. The crier is neither a legislator nor a magistrate, yet his work sustains compliance, trust, and social cohesion. Ordinary actions, delivering messages, ringing a bell, observing conduct, construct the invisible architecture that allows towns to function effectively. The labor is unglamorous, yet it underpins the stability that allows society to flourish. As the streets empty, you may reflect on the broader implications. Much of history relies not on battles or declarations, but on repeated, disciplined action, the work of messengers, monitors, and ordinary laborers. The town crier's persistence demonstrates how social order emerges from the steady application of ordinary skills and routines. Civilization depends as much on the faithful repetition of small tasks as on the grand narratives we often celebrate. You are standing inside a stone hall, its walls cold and echoing, where the rhythmic clatter of dishes, the scent of roasting meat, and the faint tang of ale fill the air. This is the dining hall of a medieval Templar commandery, a space defined by discipline, hierarchy, and austere daily routines. You are not witnessing battle, ceremony, or political intrigue, but something seemingly mundane, the feeding of a knight. Yet within this ordinary activity lies insight into the lives, expectations, and resilience of one of the most disciplined military orders of the Middle Ages. A Templar knight's diet is tightly regulated, both to maintain health and to reinforce spiritual discipline. Meals are structured and simple, reflecting vows of poverty, obedience, and chastity. Bread, porridge, legumes, and occasionally cheese form the staples. Meat appears sparingly, reserved for feast days or specific duties, while fish is consumed regularly in accordance with religious observances. Herbs and vegetables provide essential nutrition, but are grown or procured carefully to prevent spoilage or excess. Every ingredient is chosen with both practicality and moderation in mind. The preparation of meals is methodical. Brothers of lower rank or lay servants perform the labor, cleaning vegetables, chopping meat, baking bread, and tending fires. The kitchen is a site of quiet, precise work. Each task is repeated daily, yet errors are not tolerated. A poorly baked loaf or a burnt stew could disrupt the careful balance of nourishment and ritual. Efficiency and attention to detail are essential. You notice that the Templar diet is designed not for pleasure, but for sustained energy and discipline. Meals themselves are communal, yet highly structured. Knights gather in silence or minimal conversation, reflecting on spiritual or military duties. Portions are measured. Bread is broken and shared, ale or wine is served sparingly. The seating hierarchy reinforces rank. Senior knights receive positions of honor, while novices serve and observe. Eating becomes both sustenance and silent instruction, a method of instilling order, humility, and mindfulness. Daily rationing is precise. Quantities are calculated based on activity level, age, and status within the order. Novices may receive slightly smaller portions, reinforcing both humility and awareness of dependence on communal provisioning. Senior knights, while provided adequate nutrition, are expected to embody moderation, never indulgence. This careful distribution ensures that the limited resources of a commandery are used efficiently, allowing the order to function across multiple houses and campaigns without waste. Food sources are diverse yet controlled. Commanderies cultivate their own gardens, maintain livestock and stock storerooms with dried grains and preserved foods. External supplies purchased from nearby towns or transported from estates are subject to oversight. Spoilage, theft, or mismanagement could imperil both health and morale. Knights and stewards monitor stores meticulously, noting consumption rates, quality, and expected resupply. You sense a quiet vigilance. The act of feeding a knight is inseparable from the discipline of supply management. The act of eating is also intertwined with ritual. Certain prayers precede meals, others follow. Silence or low conversation allows for contemplation of duty, faith, and community. Even the simple act of drinking water or wine carries meaning, measured sips, acknowledgement of blessings, and awareness of shared life. These rituals, mundane yet pervasive, reinforce cohesion and obedience. Each meal becomes a subtle rehearsal of order, discipline, and respect for the communal life of the order. Physical demands influence dietary choices. Knights undergo rigorous training, guard duty, and manual labor. Energy expenditure is high. The diet, though austere, is designed to provide sufficient sustenance without promoting indulgence. A well-fed knight remains alert, capable, and disciplined, while excess or deficiency could compromise both health and performance. The careful balancing of nutrition, workload, and spiritual discipline exemplifies the order's holistic approach to life. You notice also the social dimension. Sharing food reinforces bonds among brothers. Observing table etiquette, respecting portion sizes, and following the hierarchy instills a shared sense of responsibility. Discipline at the table mirrors discipline on the battlefield. Small acts, passing bread without comment, waiting one's turn, consuming only allotted portions, carry cumulative significance. They are microcosms of the order's broader operational philosophy: unity, obedience, and controlled endurance. Finally, you recognize the subtle interaction between scarcity and ritual. Even in times of plenty, Templar meals are simple. Abundance is never indulged. Scarcity is managed carefully. The order's survival depends not on extravagance but on routine, discipline, and foresight. Feeding a knight, therefore, is more than providing calories. It is a careful orchestration of resources, hierarchy, and ritual that sustains both body and order. As you observe the hall and the measured activity of preparation and consumption, you may wonder, how did Templar commanderies maintain such discipline across multiple houses? How were supplies transported, monitored, and rationed during campaigns far from home? And what impact did these daily routines have on the endurance, cohesion, and identity of knights who lived under this austere yet highly structured system? You remain in the Templar commandery, now focusing on the deeper systems and procedures that sustain the feeding of knights day after day. Section 1 introduced the visible routines, the meals, preparation, and ritual, but the second layer reveals how logistics, hierarchy, and discipline combine to maintain both sustenance and order over time. Feeding a knight is an exercise in organization, foresight, and careful attention to resources. The commandery operates as a small, self-contained ecosystem. Gardens supply vegetables and herbs, livestock provides meat, milk, and eggs, granaries store dried grains, salted meat, and preserved fish. Each component is carefully monitored. Stewards and quartermasters maintain inventories, tracking consumption rates to anticipate shortages. Even minor miscalculations, an unexpected loss of livestock or spoilage of stored grain, could disrupt the delicate balance of sustenance. Feeding a knight is therefore inseparable from managing the flow of resources across multiple systems. Rationing is precise. Daily allowances are calculated according to rank, duty, and activity. Novices consume slightly smaller portions to reinforce humility, while senior knights receive sufficient nutrition for energy-intensive duties. Meat is reserved for feast days or particular tasks, fish serves as a regular protein source, and legumes and grains fill daily needs. Each ration is both a measure of sustenance and a tool for instilling discipline. Overeating is discouraged, not merely for spiritual reasons, but to preserve supplies and reinforce self-restraint. Food preparation follows strict protocols. Kitchens are staffed by brothers or lay servants trained in hygiene, portioning, and consistency. Cooking methods are designed for efficiency and durability. Stews and pottages maximize caloric content while using minimal resources. Bread is baked in communal ovens, and preserved foods are rotated to prevent spoilage. Each day, tasks are repeated meticulously, reinforcing both routine and order. Mistakes are not tolerated, as even small errors can cascade into logistical problems or health issues. You notice the role of hierarchy within these processes. Senior knights oversee the provisioning system, ensuring that supplies meet standards, while novices and lower-ranking brothers execute preparation and service. This structure maintains order while providing training and oversight. Observing tasks closely reinforces obedience, teaches attention to detail, and models the discipline expected in both domestic and military spheres. Ritual also infuses daily feeding. Prayers precede meals. Blessings accompany bread and water, and silence or measured conversation allows for reflection on duty and community. These rituals embed spiritual discipline into mundane tasks. Even the act of portioning food carries significance. It is both practical and symbolic, demonstrating order, equality, and respect for communal life. Meals become a medium for reinforcing the order's principles. Supply chains extend beyond the commandery. Estates, farms, and trading networks provide the ingredients necessary for daily sustenance. Transporting goods requires coordination, security, and foresight. Shipments may take days or weeks, yet the commandery must maintain consistent provisioning. Stewards meticulously record arrivals and usage, anticipating delays, spoilage, and seasonal fluctuations. Feeding a knight is therefore not just an act within the hall, but the culmination of complex, multi-layered planning. Health and physical demands dictate dietary adjustments. Knights perform strenuous training, patrol duties, and manual labor. Food must sustain energy without inducing lethargy. Seasonal adjustments account for activity levels and environmental factors. Winter rations are heavier and more calorie-dense, while summer diets emphasize lighter fare and hydration. This careful tailoring ensures that knights remain capable and resilient, maintaining readiness for both daily tasks and potential military action. You begin to perceive the subtle social function of meals. Sharing food strengthens bonds among brothers, reinforces hierarchy, and cultivates mutual accountability. Adherence to table etiquette, observing order, portion control, and communal norms reflects broader obedience and cohesion. Minor infractions such as taking more than allotted or speaking out of turn carry social consequences that reinforce discipline subtly yet effectively. Meals are a daily rehearsal of hierarchy, order, and shared responsibility. Finally, you consider the balance between austerity and necessity. The Templar diet is intentionally simple, even during periods of abundance. The order's survival and identity depend on restraint, repetition, and careful management. Feeding a knight is thus both practical and philosophical. It sustains the body, enforces discipline, and reinforces communal values. Every meal is a silent lesson in moderation, endurance, and foresight. As you observe this intricate system, you may wonder, how did commanderies adapt provisioning during long campaigns or sieges? How did they prevent spoilage, theft, or imbalance in multi-month operations? And how did these daily acts of discipline shape the resilience, cohesion, and collective identity of the knights who lived under such meticulously structured routines? The day in the Templar commandery draws toward evening. Meals have been prepared, served, and consumed. Tables cleared and kitchens tidied. Yet the significance of feeding a knight becomes clearer when you observe the lasting effects on health, discipline, and communal cohesion. This seemingly mundane task is central to the survival and identity of the order, shaping both body and mind. The commanderies' systems of provision and rationing ensure continuity. Storerooms and granaries are carefully inventoried. Stewards note usage patterns and anticipate future needs. Even during long campaigns or siege conditions, these records guide distribution, prevent waste, and sustain energy levels. The survival of individual knights, and by extension the order, depends on meticulous attention to supply and consumption. Feeding a knight is therefore inseparable from planning, foresight, and administrative skill. Meals reinforce hierarchy and communal discipline. Novices continue to serve, learning the rhythms of responsibility and the subtleties of obedience. Senior knights model moderation and attentiveness, demonstrating how ritual, proportion, and focus translate into both spiritual and practical resilience. Eating becomes a form of training, maintaining composure, observing order, and internalizing communal norms. Even the act of sharing bread or ale embodies lessons in trust, cooperation, and social cohesion. Physical and mental endurance are direct outcomes of these routines. Knights engaged in training, guard duty, and labor rely on consistent nutrition to sustain energy. Over time, the austere yet balanced diet strengthens resilience, ensuring that fatigue, illness, or distraction do not compromise performance. The structure of meals mirrors the structure of the order. Both are carefully measured, repetitive, and disciplined, cultivating reliability and endurance. The ritual dimension continues to shape daily experience. Prayer, silence, and deliberate movement embed mindfulness into ordinary labor. Knights learn to approach each meal with awareness, observing portion limits, hygiene practices, and proper etiquette. Spiritual discipline and physical sustenance intersect in each act of eating, reinforcing the values of temperance, focus, and unity. You also notice how these practices foster community bonds. Sharing meals creates intimacy within hierarchy. Each knight observes and supports the other, ensuring fairness, order, and mutual care. This daily reinforcement of social structure reduces conflict, strengthens trust, and instills a collective identity. The simple act of feeding is thus both practical and symbolic, sustaining the body while cementing the cohesion essential for military and spiritual effectiveness. Logistics and foresight remain critical. Estates, gardens, livestock, and supply networks all converge to provide predictable resources. Even during campaigns far from home, meticulous planning allows knights to receive sufficient sustenance. Failures in supply could weaken morale, reduce effectiveness, or create disorder. Feeding a knight is therefore both an exercise in immediate care and long-term strategic planning. Ultimately, the act of feeding exemplifies how the mundane underpins extraordinary endurance. Knights may be celebrated for bravery, battle, and devotion, but these achievements rest on countless ordinary routines, measuring rations, tending fires, carrying water, baking bread, and observing ritual. Discipline in daily life produces resilience in the field. Repetition and care in the hall translate into cohesion and capability on campaign. You may now reflect on the profound influence of routine, restraint, and foresight. The Templar diet is austere, yet it sustains energy, teaches discipline, and strengthens communal bonds. Feeding a knight may appear mundane, but it underpins survival, identity, and order. Through this ordinary labor, the order maintains readiness, instills values, and ensures cohesion, illustrating how history is often shaped by the quiet, repetitive acts that sustain human endurance and collective purpose. You find yourself at the entrance of a medieval granary, a tall timber structure with thick walls, elevated floors, and narrow windows. The scent of stored grain, oats, barley, wheat, permeates the air. Outside, fields stretch toward the horizon, but inside, the focus is narrower, more urgent, protecting the harvest, preserving sustenance, and preventing spoilage or theft. In this quiet yet essential space, the survival of a community hinges on routine, vigilance, and discipline. You are about to witness how the mundane labor of guarding grain shapes both individual behavior and communal security. Granaries were vital. They stored not only food for the immediate population, but reserves for lean years, payments in kind, and provisions for soldiers or travelers. Loss or contamination could have catastrophic consequences: famine, economic instability, and social unrest. The responsibility of guarding the granary, therefore, fell to trusted individuals, sometimes town officials, sometimes hired guards, occasionally members of a local militia. Their work was repetitive, often dull, but critical. The structure itself reflects lessons learned over generations. Elevated floors protect against moisture and vermin, narrow access points restrict entry, and timber or stone walls resist fire and intrusion. Guards patrol within and around these structures, sometimes in pairs, sometimes alone. Their duties include counting stocks, checking for signs of rodents or mold, and monitoring who comes and goes. Every step, every observation is both preventive and educational. Vigilance cultivates awareness and ensures accountability. Daily routines are precise. Guards rise early, inspect locks, sweep the floor, check storage bins, and record quantities. Entries and exits are logged. Deliveries are received under scrutiny, weighed and verified. Even mundane actions, measuring grain, brushing dust from sacks, or adjusting ventilation, carry significance. They prevent spoilage, maintain accurate records, and reinforce the perception of order. The routine itself becomes a tool for safeguarding resources, embedding reliability into human behavior. Food storage is not passive. Grain can rot, sprout, or attract pests. Guards must be attuned to subtle indicators, changes in smell, texture, or temperature. Small deviations signal potential problems that, if unaddressed, could compromise the harvest. These tasks require patience, observation, and methodical repetition. Boredom is inevitable, yet attention to minute details can avert disaster. The granary teaches endurance and the importance of consistent care. Hierarchy shapes responsibilities. Senior guards oversee inventory, authorize access, and resolve disputes. Junior guards carry out inspections and routine patrols. Apprentices or local laborers may assist in moving grain or maintaining facilities. Authority is both practical and symbolic. Those entrusted with responsibility model diligence, while others learn compliance, patience, and precision. Hierarchical structures ensure that labor is organized and errors minimized. The social dimension of granary work is subtle but vital. Guards interact with merchants, farmers, and town officials. Transactions are scrutinized. Was the correct measure delivered? Were records accurate? Missteps, whether accidental or intentional, can result in fines, reprimands, or social censure. Trust, built through routine and transparency, sustains the system. Even in quiet moments, observation and documentation enforce accountability. Seasonal pressures shape labor intensity. During harvest, the granary swells with produce, increasing the workload of guards. Winter brings potential moisture damage and freezing hazards, while summer invites pests and decay. Guards adapt routines accordingly. More frequent inspections, careful ventilation, and vigilant monitoring of deliveries. Workload ebbs and flows, yet consistency remains essential. The granary is a dynamic system, responding to both natural rhythms and human activity. You notice that guarding grain extends beyond physical presence. Mental discipline is cultivated through repetition, observation, and problem-solving. Guards must anticipate threats, plan inspections, and adapt to unforeseen circumstances. The mundane labor fosters cognitive skills as well as endurance. Over time, these practices produce a cadre of individuals capable of maintaining stability in both ordinary and exceptional conditions. Finally, you see the granary as a microcosm of broader social organization. Its labor reinforces hierarchy, instills responsibility, and sustains the community. Every measure of grain, every recorded entry, every patrol contributes to survival. The quiet, repetitive work of guards preserves both material resources and trust, demonstrating how history often depends on vigilance in small, unremarkable spaces. As you observe this routine, you may wonder, how were granaries secured during times of war or rebellion? How did guards balance vigilance with monotony over weeks and months? And how did the routines developed for grain preservation influence broader strategies of management, discipline, and community resilience? You continue observing the granary, now focusing on the subtler dimensions of guarding and maintaining its contents. Section 1 outlined the physical structure, daily routines and hierarchy. Section 2 delves into the mental discipline, social networks and logistical strategies that make this mundane work effective over long periods. Guarding grain is as much about anticipation, observation, and methodical planning as it is about physical vigilance. The granary operates as a carefully controlled system. Each sack of grain is catalogued and its location noted. Inspections are conducted methodically. Guards check for moisture, pests, sprouting, and contamination. Even small deviations, slight dampness, irregular texture, or unusual odors are recorded and acted upon immediately. These tasks demand patience and attention to detail. Over time, guards develop a nuanced understanding of the stored produce. They can estimate weight by touch, detect spoilage by smell, and anticipate potential hazards before they escalate. Routines are rigid yet adaptive. Guards follow fixed circuits, recording observations and reporting anomalies. Seasonal and environmental changes dictate adjustments during winter. Attention focuses on freezing hazards and condensation. During summer, ventilation and pest management dominate. The granary's rhythms are dictated by both natural cycles and human schedules. Guards learn to read subtle signs in their environment, integrating observation with institutional knowledge. Security is layered. Physical measures, locked doors, elevated floors, reinforced walls, are complemented by procedural ones. Logs of entries and exits, verification of deliveries, and witness oversight reduce opportunities for theft or error. Social pressures are also in play. Guards rely on reputation, accountability to superiors, and shared norms to enforce vigilance. A lapse may invite censure, financial liability, or loss of trust. In this way, the granary operates as a nexus of human discipline and structural precaution. Coordination is essential. Granary work involves multiple actors: guards, stewards, laborers, farmers, and local officials. Communication ensures that deliveries are checked, irregularities noted, and storage maintained. For larger granaries or those supplying military garrisons, coordination extends across distances. Transported grain must be tracked, weighed, and stored in alignment with ongoing usage. Errors in this chain can disrupt supply, demonstrating that the work of guarding is interconnected with broader logistical systems. Mental endurance is cultivated through repetition. Guards spend long hours performing similar tasks, inspecting bins, sweeping floors, or counting sacks. Boredom is a constant threat to vigilance, yet through routine, attention becomes habitual. Experienced guards develop strategies to maintain focus, methodical checks, recording procedures, and deliberate pacing. The monotony, while tedious, strengthens observation skills and resilience. The mental discipline acquired within the granary has broader applications, shaping problem-solving, patience, and attention in other aspects of community or military life. Conflict and threat are always potential. During times of unrest, raids, famine, or political instability, the granary becomes a focal point for security concerns. Guards may reinforce physical measures, increase patrols, and coordinate with local militias. Even in peaceful periods, vigilance is necessary. Rodents, mold, and accidental spoilage pose constant danger. The work is never complete. Guarding is a continuous cycle of observation, maintenance, and correction. The social dynamics within the granary reinforce hierarchy and accountability. Senior guards supervise procedures, train new recruits, and mediate disputes. Apprentices and laborers learn through observation and practice, internalizing both technical skills and the ethical expectations of stewardship. Trust is reinforced daily. Each individual relies on others to follow procedures, report accurately, and exercise diligence. The granary thus functions as both a physical repository and a training ground for discipline, responsibility, and cooperation. You notice that these routines also reflect broader societal priorities. Grain is essential not only for sustenance but for economic stability, taxation, and military readiness. The methods developed to manage it, inventory control, environmental monitoring, and procedural oversight, are microcosms of larger administrative practices. Guards are performing labor that underpins civic life. Their vigilance preserves resources, sustains health, and maintains order. As you watch, you begin to appreciate the layered complexity behind this seemingly simple duty. Guards cultivate not just physical security, but cognitive skill, social cohesion, and systemic resilience. The granary demonstrates how ordinary repetitive labor can safeguard communities, prevent crisis, and support survival. You may now wonder, how did granary systems scale to supply entire towns or armies? How were guards trained to balance vigilance with monotony over extended periods? And what lessons might these medieval routines offer about the interplay between discipline, observation, and societal stability? As the day winds down, the granary settles into quiet routine. Sacks are stacked neatly, floors swept, and records updated. Yet the significance of guarding grain becomes clearer in this concluding moment. Survival, economic stability, and community cohesion all hinge on the steady, disciplined work carried out in this unassuming space. The labor is repetitive, sometimes monotonous, but it is indispensable. Physical vigilance has ensured the preservation of the harvest. Guards check locks, inspect bins, and walk the perimeter, preventing theft, rodent infestation, or accidental spoilage. Structural safeguards, elevated floors, reinforced doors, ventilation systems complement human oversight, but none can replace careful attention. The combination of physical design and disciplined labor exemplifies how ordinary diligence sustains essential resources. Mental endurance is equally critical. Guards spend hours repeating inspections, counting, and monitoring. This monotony cultivates attention to detail, patience, and foresight. Over time, their skills become intuitive. Subtle changes in smell, texture, or color signal potential problems. Anticipating and mitigating threats before they escalate demonstrates how routine, repetitive labor can produce resilience, not just security. Hierarchy and social structure reinforce efficiency. Senior guards oversee procedures, ensuring accuracy and mentoring newcomers. Apprentices and laborers learn through observation and hands-on experience. Accountability is embedded, mistakes are noted, lessons incorporated, and trust maintained. The granary becomes a space where discipline, cooperation, and responsibility are practiced daily. These social mechanisms ensure continuity, even in the face of turnover or crises. Seasonal rhythms dictate adjustments. Winter demands vigilance against freezing or condensation. Summer focuses on ventilation and pest control. Harvest time brings increased workload and coordination challenges. Guards adapt routines accordingly, demonstrating flexibility within structured procedures. The granary is not static. It is a dynamic system that responds to environmental conditions while maintaining order. The broader significance of granary labor becomes apparent. Grain supports not only food security but economic stability, taxation, and military provisioning. The routines of inspection, storage, and protection are foundational to civic and regional survival. Ordinary, repetitive tasks performed faithfully underpin extraordinary outcomes. Communities are fed, armies supplied, and social order preserved. You begin to see the granary as more than a building. It is a microcosm of medieval organization, discipline, and foresight. Every measured action, inspecting a sack, logging a delivery, patrolling a perimeter, contributes to a network of stability. Guards may be uncelebrated, but their labor ensures that life continues without disruption, demonstrating how history often relies on the quiet persistence of ordinary people. Finally, you may reflect on lessons that extend beyond medieval contexts. Vigilance, routine, and accountability, applied even in seemingly mundane tasks, create resilience and stability. Just as medieval granaries depended on disciplined labor to secure essential resources, so too do modern societies rely on repeated, careful effort to maintain infrastructure, supply chains, and social cohesion. The survival of communities, past and present, often rests on the dedication to ordinary, repetitive, yet crucial work.